Great. Yeah, everyone can hear me. Okay. Awesome. So, this panel is on obviously on biodiversity, which I'm really excited about. I'm supposed to give a brief introduction to myself and the field, so I'll just briefly start. My name is Andrew Schulz. I'm the moderator. Really, where I got involved into the space is as a PhD student at Georgia Tech in the United States. I got to teach a class on conservation technology and really got to understand how engineers, biologists, and computer scientists can work together on looking at biodiversity and the changing climate, as well as some other things. I think really what I'm the most excited about from our panel is we have people that are studying all sets of flora and fauna as well as a bunch of people that I've looked up to for years. So I'm a little intimidated slash scared. I think the biggest impact that we have is how can sort of these changing technologies in terms of I think we're gonna cover everything from robotics to AI to machine learning to autonomous systems and how these can really provide some really interesting scopes into biodiversity monitoring. But I'm excited for us to get into this and go. And so I would ask that each of our speakers talk for, I guess, 2 to 3 minutes for brief intro, and I will pass to Sara.
Hi, it's great to see you, Andrew and Blair, and it's really nice to meet you, Angelo. So I'm a professor at MIT in computer science and AI, and my work has for the past actually close to a decade now really focused on this intersection between developing modern AI techniques, specifically targeting these kind of big open needs when we move to the space of like complex biodiversity and ecological data. I got my start working with camera traps, which are sort of heat or motion activated cameras that capture imagery, usually of mid to large terrestrial megafauna in the landscape, so things like deer or coyotes, but increasingly are actually used in marine ecosystems, kind of in dense forests, et cetera. And then, over time, my interests have like expanded to more and more modalities of data. And actually, recently, I've been very fascinated by this question of like, at what scales do which modalities of data maximally contribute information? And actually, how do you think about more effectively choosing what to sample where, given limited resources, to try to understand various dimensions of what we hope to understand about the natural world? Maybe I'll pass it off to Blair.
Sure. So I'm Blair. I am a project leader at the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior in Constance, Germany. By training, I'm an animal behavioral ecologist, which means I study animals in their natural or real-world environments, and I'm interested in sort of how they use behavior to overcome challenges in their environment. My particular areas of study are the movement ecology of animals, collective behavior, and anti-predator strategies, so how prey animals avoid becoming a meal for a predator. Within the sort of conservation tech realm, my general focus is on developing and applying new tools, particularly drones and AI technologies, so that we can collect and analyze data at scale and more effectively monitor animals and study their behavior in these real-world habitats. So I have a few projects that I've worked on, and I'll drop links to these in the chat once I'm done talking. So as a postdoc at the Max Planck, I led the herd hover project. And in this project, we developed drone-based methods for observing animals, and particularly groups of animals, in natural environments, mostly in Kenya and sub-Saharan Africa, where I tend to do most of my work. And then we designed a data processing pipeline for extracting various types of high-resolution data from this imagery, including the behavior of the animals, the movement, and elements of their social and physical environments. Currently, I am a PI and the lead ecologist on the Wild Drone project, which is an EU-funded project in which we are aiming to develop autonomous drone technologies for nature conservation missions. And so this is a really big interdisciplinary collaborative project of 19 partners across Europe and Africa who are collectively training 13 PhD students in this interdisciplinary space of wildlife ecology, conservation, area robotics, and computer vision. And so we recently found out that we were awarded a second grant to follow up to Wild Drone, Robotics. So stay tuned for more about that. This will sort of expand the scope of Wild Drone to include aquatic and terrestrial robots, as well as moving beyond just image-based sampling to physical sampling, such as eDNA, fecal samples, and even bioacoustics as well. And so no link for that one yet, but I'll post links to the other projects in the chat. Thanks.
So I thank you so much, Blair and Sarah. So we will move to our third person. Would you mind introducing yourself, Martin?
Hi everyone, I'm Martin Dallimer. I'm a professor in environmental sustainability at the Centre for Environmental Policy at Imperial College in London. And maybe I'm a bit of an odd one out because I neither develop robots nor do I apply them in any field situations. But more broadly, I guess I'm working on an interest in if and how we can improve how technical and engineering sciences research through to application and private businesses. How can they be better aligned with environmental and social sciences? So can we jointly and early identify where opportunities lie for the implementation of these technologies and also where the challenges or unintended consequences may possibly emerge of widespread implementation of robotics and autonomous systems? So the sorts of things that we've been doing in this space are using foresighting and horizon scanning techniques with both robotics and biodiversity conservation professionals and also development professionals and academics to try and understand where these different groups of researchers and practitioners see opportunities and challenges and how robotics will inevitably radically transform how we as people interact with the natural world around us, how we research it, and how those technologies actually transform the landscapes within which they operate as well.
Thank you, Martin. And last, Angelo.
Hello, everybody. Pleased to meet you all. Well, I'm a researcher at the National Research Council of Italy in the Institute of Marine Engineering, and Simona, that is in front of me now. Well, I'm a naval architect and marine engineer, but from many years I'm developing marine robots and tools for sampling in the environment. I put in the chat just a small overview of the environments we work on. And the idea of these robots is to be the target of sampling and collecting data in environments that usually are not accessed by other robots or other people or what else. So we work basically in those areas like polar environments where data related to climate are lacking. In the last years, I participated and I led some campaigns in Antarctica and in the Svalbard region in the Arctic to collect data in front of tidal glaciers for understanding which are the impacts of climate change on the environments of Antarctica and of the Arctic. I designed and built and used some robots for collecting data in the creeks and rivers here in the Liguria region in Italy, and also in coastal areas of the Mediterranean, where the fall of pieces of rocks can be impactful for people. So the idea is that these robots can help us collect data that usually are not collected. And as last, I'm now leading a project that is called Marmot to sample and collect data related to the environment in alpine lakes at really high altitudes. The idea is to build robots that can be transported on a backpack and collect really high quality data in this environment. So this is the sum up of my activities.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And I just want to highlight that a lot of the panelists have been actually posting in some of their papers, some of their projects they're working on. I'm a little biased, but I also just want to really highlight. So Sara started the AI for Conservation Slack back in 2019, and so she included some information on that. But that's a really great place to meet. The other thing, other people. The other thing I want to highlight is Martin. I know you said that you're not a roboticist. I think something that really excites me about this panel. I don't consider myself a roboticist. I think, but all of us, are doing really, really interesting things at the field of biodiversity monitoring. And then I think a lot of the work that you all have has really great applications to robotics. So I think that's okay. And we can still get into some exciting questions. So just to kind of follow up on that, could each of you all maybe highlight a little bit, and we'll start again with Sara. It's a three-parter question, but it's really the specific challenge that you are currently actively working on in terms of in biodiversity, then the climate problem that this relates to, and what you're specifically doing. So it's the challenge, what you're doing to address it, really, and how that relates to, I think, climate change with biodiversity. So I'll pass to you, Sara.
Okay. Yeah. It's tough to pick just one challenge that I'm working on. I think there are a lot. But I guess like if you wanted to put most of the things I'm doing into one bucket, I would say that one of the large challenges that I try very hard to address is limitations in data and knowledge about biodiversity and some of the biases in existing data sets around biodiversity at a global scale. So we think about what data is available and accessible. Often there's a lot of complexity, both around kind of historic precedent for where and when data is collected. If we look at the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, GBIF, you can see that kind of data is maybe better correlated with GDP than actually species richness, like, how many unique species there are in any given place on Earth. And then beyond that, that's just spatial bias. Then you can also kind of dig into the complexities of taxonomic bias. We have a lot more data of birds than we do of many other taxa, and temporal bias. Unfortunately, most of the kind of very rich data sets we have collected have really only been accessible with the advancements in hardware that have come in the last like 20, 25 years. So given all of this, actually, how do we best understand this very complex system, and are there ways to overcome it? And there are a few different approaches we've been looking at. One is that as we start to use machine learning more and more to try to process these sort of raw data streams as they come in, there's this unfortunate bias against things that are rare that really is just driven by the fact that if you don't have enough training data for a given thing, you can't get a machine learning model to recognize it robustly. This is kind of a known challenge in machine learning, this like few shot learning problem. And so we have a bunch of different efforts trying to figure out how to get models to be better at recognizing rare stuff, because for our interests in biodiversity, the rare stuff is often the most important. That includes kind of more expert reasoning, or actually sort of expert knowledge being baked into the systems, trying to have, some co-benefits from common species that can be applied to rare ones, and also looking at how we can actually potentially generate additional training data for rare species that breaks that challenging Pareto frontier between sort of fidelity and diversity that is a common challenge for generative image models or video models. Additionally, we sort of try to think about how to make more use of the data we've already collected. So if any of you have ever worked with iNaturalist, this is sort of a very large community science-driven platform for capturing species occurrence data, just lets any of you go out and take a photo. You might also in Europe be familiar with something like PlantNet. All of these things, you have all these images, and then they're identified to species, and we have a kind of a single species occurrence record for each image. There is a lot more information in those pixels than we're currently harnessing. And so I've been with one of my graduate students sort of digging into what are the really efficient mechanisms that unlock some of that other information, species in the background, but also going beyond species to things like better measurements of microscale environmental covariates, measurements of things like behavior that Blair is interested in, species co-occurrence and interaction, food web sort of types of biotic or trophic interactions. So how do we kind of do better with the data we do have to kind of start filling in some of those other gaps? I did post in the chat a pretty cool paper that I'm excited about that we wrote recently that's explicitly about the sort of 7 biodiversity shortfalls and how sort of AI might interact with the different dimensions of those biodiversity shortfalls that go beyond just knowledge of species.
Yeah.
And then finally, again, with this idea of multimodality, you know, so these different modalities of data that are being collected are capturing different dimensions of what's important. And so we've been trying to figure out, you know, what are the sort of fundamental complementarities, and how do we, again, like potentially help evaluate our systems, maybe by looking at agreement across modalities, or even think about how we can harness sort of the scale of satellite data given the limited amount of ground level information. In terms of how that relates to climate change, I would say like without sort of larger scale understanding of trends and how things are changing, it's very difficult to understand the relationships between both anthropogenic change and climate change, and how that's actually affecting species change and vice versa, because there are some evidence that species are actually also contributing back to some of these sort of climate factors, things like elephants, which I know Andrew loves, being ecosystem engineers that are actually driving sort of carbon sequestration across Africa. So I would say that if we want to understand these at sort of a nuanced scale, we have to be able to sort of drive the information needed to kind of capture that. And so it's related in that way.
Yeah,
All 3 things.
awesome. Yeah, I think you caught all 3, and I was just going to add, I think also when you're talking about, and I'm sure Blair's going to talk about this, animal behavior, right? Because we've had some of these data sets now for longer amounts of time, right? We can look at how some of these things are evolving and changing. So I'll pass on to Blair. So the 3 is essentially what you're working on, the challenges that you're working to address, and how that relates a bit to climate change.
Yeah, so thanks. Great lead-in, because the thing that I'm working on is this idea of sort of scaling up research in behavioral ecology so that we can gain a more mechanistic understanding of the role of behavior in ecological processes. So if you think about it, animals mediate a huge range of different ecological processes. So to take, for example, the species that I work with, zebras and antelope in Africa, they're really central to their ecosystems in a number of ways. So they support, obviously, carnivore populations as their prey. They have huge, massive impacts on the vegetation communities through their browsing and their feeding behavior. And they transfer nutrients and diseases and seeds and all sorts of other biological material over these vast landscapes through their movement. And all of this is mediated by the behavior of these animals. But behavior is very flexible, which makes it a really powerful tool for the animals, but it also means that it can change really dynamically in response to changing environmental conditions. So I see behavior as this really key link between changing environmental conditions on the one hand and the ecological impacts of those environmental changes. And so I think it's really important that we understand how animals are adjusting their behavior to these ecological conditions and what roles they're playing in their ecosystems. But I think this is also kind of a missing link, because in behavioral ecology, we've sort of lagged a bit behind other areas of ecology just because of the nature of our data and what's required to collect it. So conventionally, to collect behavioral data, you have an expert in the field with binoculars and a notebook, and you're watching the animals directly and interpreting the behavior as you watch it. And this is a really valuable approach. It's a great way for building, insight into your species and systems. But it's really sort of a rate limiting factor. So having to have experts in the field directly co-located with the animals really limits how many animals and how many populations we can study. And so it really constrains our ability to get an understanding of how behavior varies across time and space and across populations. And so I think this is where robotics and AI technologies can come in. So robotics can be, give us these sensors that you can deploy throughout the environment. So you don't need to have an expert in the field with the animals anymore. You can sort of put sensors on the animals, or you can put a drone up to autonomously monitor a landscape, or you can put out camera traps, as Sara mentioned. And then AI and machine learning can really help us process that huge amount of data more efficiently so that we can get some actually timely ecological insights from this data. And so Yeah, so to me, technology is really the key to scaling this up and not, replacing human experts, because you really do need that expertise and the insight into the behavioral strategies, but scaling up our studies so we can better understand these animal environmental interactions, and we can better sort of understand the extent of variation within species, across populations. And so this is the main problem I'm trying to tackle through these projects, such as the Herd Hover project, such as the Wild Drone project, and so on, and also through my group's research, which really focuses on using and applying these tools and applying these data sets to answer big questions in behavioral ecology, and sort of showcasing the value of this big data approach. So I think
Yes, I think
everything.
that covered, yeah, 3 for 3. So again, Martin, we'll pass to you. And also I see Angelo, you're answering. Some people are asking questions in the chat. So if you have questions for individuals, then some of our panelists can answer those in the chat, and we'll get to that live Q&A in a bit. So Martin, what are some of the challenges that you're working on? What are you working on to address and tackling those challenges? And I think a lot of the work that you do obviously impacts and works at the interface of climate change. So could you go through that briefly?
Actually don't do a great deal at the interface of climate change. I'm much more around biodiversity, system restoration, and so on, and the kind of the social drivers and impacts of such things. I suppose just listening to Sara and Blair, the things that really came out of some of the work that we've done recently is this notion that robotics, I mean, there are these huge inequalities in terms of where data are collected, when they're collected, the taxonomic groups that are focused on. And one of the big issues that has come out of some of our kind of expert elicitation processes is the extent to which will robotics, AI, etc., will all this new technology just exacerbate those existing inequalities? So will we just get more and better data on zebras, and we still know nothing about worms and beetles and so on? Will the capacity for this technological innovation and the immense kind of knowledge and that's needed to develop them, and also the financial capacity that's needed to implement them, mean that high income countries simply get better and better data on issues that are relevant to them, and low income places will just be left behind? So we'll end up with in essence a data and digital divide in our understanding of biodiversity, ecosystem processes and functioning. And then there's also the inequalities around how people and communities may or may not be involved in understanding what is going on with the biodiversity and the ecosystems around them. So, drones, they may be these great tools for collecting data, but they also are these days inexorably linked with surveillance, with conflict, with militarization. And you can certainly imagine a situation where local communities that are aware of all this remote monitoring of the environments around them find themselves increasingly isolated, increasingly dispossessed in terms of how they interact with the world around them. So how do you again ensure that the tech isn't driving this sort of need for data, and we're actually working with communities to ensure that they understand what's going on and they have an input into what sort of knowledge may be collected, how and why. And the other kind of source of inequality that's highlighted in some of the work that we've done is this notion that perhaps technological solutions will in somehow kind of almost block people from getting involved in biodiversity and conservation, because those kind of grudge jobs where we all started, the sort of going out in the field with your binoculars and a bit of paper and writing stuff down, will no longer be available. So how do you stop that kind of inequality in the discipline and the relationships between people and nature becoming even more extreme as technology takes over these sort of base roles in how people interact with and learn about the natural world around them?
Can I respond? Is that?
Yeah, please, Sara.
So I completely agree with you that kind of like one of the kind of things AI is best at is almost like exacerbating the status quo. And we've kind of seen this across many different applications of AI. It sort of exacerbates historical biases in many ways. I think that there's been a lot of discussion of this in the area writ large, and I can't sort of speak to sort of all of the different dimensions of geopolitical and historical and kind of like data sovereignty complexities. But one thing that I at least have been very passionate about is that we are not going to see equitable deployment of AI if AI is only developed by people in sort of existing, big tech companies or prestigious institutions. And so part of my kind of strong drive to figure out what is the best mechanism for expanding capacity in these interdisciplinary spaces and training ecologists sort of across different countries, across different backgrounds in not only like the right intuition around AI, how to kind of interpret the hype, how to understand when and where AI is relevant to you. What are the actual driving costs of using AI? What is the kind of cost value benefit? Like when do you actually see it be worthwhile? It's really also figuring out, what are the ways to teach robust applied AI skills? Because I actually don't think that the innovations in AI are really going to drive a lot of the expansion. I think it's just doing a good job of applying existing techniques to new settings, new scenarios, new kind of problems. So we've been running this CV for Ecology program for a few years now, which is essentially specifically geared at training ecologists how to sort of build their own AI systems for their own research questions or their own sort of, challenges in the public sector. And we've been trying to come up with the right mechanisms to then actually also expand the capacity building. So we've been working with the African Institute of Mathematical Sciences and sort of building some of that curriculum into their AI for Science master's program. And we've been working with the Wildlife Research Institute in India and a couple of Indian institutions, sort of running their own version kind of within India of these types of training programs. But also on the other side, I think there's a huge need for research in the AI community that is driven by efficiency in data, efficiency in compute, efficiency in sort of deployability and use, because one of the really strong limiting factors now is just if you need to run a very big, expensive model, you need access to very expensive machines that, in my experience, are just not accessible to ecologists, even sort of across the board in the United States versus, if you go to like some remote island. And so I actually think that there's kind of this maybe driver that might push for more equity and democratization of these techniques if we sort of treat efficiency as a first-class citizen in the research community versus just accuracy.
And I want to I'm the moderator, but I'm going to add my 30 cents to that is I think what's really interesting about some of these challenges is I think this field in general, if we're talking about AI for conservation, often has a very far barrier of entry where even students get introduced to it at the graduate level for the first time. And so I think the other part on top of a lot of what Sara has done that's really important is to make sure that undergraduate students have access because sometimes the entry of these modules of learning about conservation can be at the graduate level where people are very late to get exposed to it and potentially are even already in a different field. And I think robotics for climate solutions as well is similar to that. Blair, did you want to have a comment?
Yeah, I was just this is something we think about a lot in the Wildron project, this sort of equity and how the idea that we don't want to replace human expertise, we want to complement it. And so I think a good example of a project that we are working on in collaboration with Odetti Conservancy, which is one of the partners on the project, has to do with monitoring rhinos. And so they're a big rhino sanctuary, the biggest in East Africa, and they have to actually find each rhino, every individual rhino on the sanctuary every 4 days and lay eyes on it and identify that individual rhino, which is a huge task. And it's also quite dangerous because you're walking through environment where they do this on foot, so they're walking through the environment where there's not only rhinos but many other things that can and will hurt or kill you. And so when we sort of talked with them initially about this idea, our impression was that they wanted a drone that could automatically, search and find the rhinos and identify them. But once we got on the ground and we're working with these rangers, it's clear that that's not really what they need. They're very, very good at what they do. They are very good. They know where the rhinos are. They know the home ranges of the rhinos. They know, well, if it's not in this bush, it's probably sleeping over in this bush. So they know where to look. And they are very, very good at identifying the rhinos either on site or from images. It's just really dangerous for them to physically get in the same place with the rhinos to do that. And so we've sort of been continually working with them to adjust our understanding of what's needed and what's not maybe the most technologically advanced solution, but what's the most practical solution that sort of lets them increase the safety and efficiency of their job. But they already have a very effective system. It just happens to be extremely dangerous for the people performing the task. And so I think that's the approach we're taking to sort of try to not impose our expectations on what the best solution to the problem might be, but actually, work quite closely with the people who would, ideally be using these solutions in the future.
And to piggyback on that, we're talking about maybe challenging environments to do observations. And so I'll pass Angelo, if you could briefly discuss some of the challenges, which I know interface quite a lot with that.
Thanks. Well, yes, the one that I've chosen is summarizing most of the challenges I highlighted before. Is related to the project for monitoring alpine lakes and proglacial alpine lakes, that are the lakes that are formed by the retrieve of alpine lakes that are retrieving and shrinking in an unbelievable way in the last years. These lakes are forming and were not existing in 10 years ago. And obviously this is due to the climate change. And but these glaciers are the water towers for lowland areas. So understanding what's happening there and how the hydrology is changing there is obviously important, both for understanding the impacts of climate change, both for understanding the real needs of people that live in the lowlands. This continuous glacier retrieve forms these lakes that are completely unknown, and what's inside these lakes in terms of pollution, in terms of biology, microbiology, is completely unknown. So the idea of this project was to try to understand what's going on in that areas, also to monitor the environment, both in the water and in the air. So the idea is to design a robot that can be, as I said before, transported on the backpack. And but it should be also low cost, because we want to give this also to people that can go there and sample for us, ergonomic and lightweight. But the idea is that this was discussed before also by Simona, that the data that we have to collect should be reliable. So the sensors that are should be mounted on these robots, and the data that we collect should be reliable. So all the sensors, even if low cost, should be calibrated, should be precise and obviously reliable. So this is a real challenge that we are working on. Our idea is also to give the possibility to people that are not on the lakes to see what's happening on the robots. So we are also creating an infrastructure that allows us to share the data in real time from these lakes on the web. But sometimes communication is missing in in this environment. So an IoT infrastructure is going to be created for this environment. So challenges are a lot, and the problem is obvious. Try to understand the climate change impact and assess it in the alpine environments. See if pollutants are also transported on the glaciers and released in these waters. And this is something that can be done both in the alpine lakes and in the Arctic. We did it in the Arctic because obviously the surface of glaciers is a place where pollutants are. It's an incredible area that is melting, that melts a lot because of the pollutants, and all this pollution is then transported to the water. So water and microbiology and pollution are changing due to our impact also in other parts of the earth.
Awesome. Well, not awesome. Thank you for sharing. That yeah. That's do not clip that. So so from the standpoint of like all of our panelists, one of the things I'm really excited to get you all's opinion on is when we think of like the grand challenges of biodiversity, conservation, monitoring, etc. Do you all think this is more of a software, a hardware, or maybe even more of a social challenge ongoing? Like, what are some of the things that are potentially some obstacles as we work on trying to address some of the challenges that each one of your labs is working on? And I see Angelo. I saw you briefly raise your hand, so I will. Angelo and then Blair.
No,
If you'd like to start.
the question is great because one thing that I found interesting is that my role can be collecting data, but robotics has also an impactful effect on people. So if you try to communicate to the people via robotics, you reach more people. With this, we have also the role of sharing the problems of climate with people and reaching much more. Doing something that is also interesting for people, then also only collecting this data that can be useful, obviously, for understanding the things. But I think that working on people is something that we have to do, definitely. And via robotics, we can reach people in a smart way, let's say. This is something that is obviously something that is much more difficult than the specific challenge of robotics, design of stuff and what else, because things are really going fast in the development of robotics, I think.
Yeah. Blair?
I would say so for some of the more advanced sort of problems that I think about, especially in terms of behavior, I think there are some sort of technological barriers still that we're trying to overcome for sure. But I think there's a lot that is possible technologically right now, especially in terms of monitoring biodiversity, especially the large sort of mammals that I work with. I mean, the main thing that our field partners want is a drone that can go across the entire park regularly and do a image-based census of the animals. This is something that's technologically possible. The barriers are issues that Martin already raised about cost and public perception and safety and having the regulatory infrastructure that lets us deploy these technologies in very complex airspaces that are used by multiple different stakeholders, for lack of a better term. And so I think that there's a lot that we can technologically do right now that's being held up by other equally important challenges.
My friend Sasha Lucioni was in an interview recently, and she said we can't chatbot our way out of climate change, which I thought is very pithy, but I think is kind of an important thing to remember. I would say that there are a lot of places and opportunities for technology to be a part of like the ways that we try to move forward, but the more I actually work on these real world kind of deployments of AI, the more you recognize that actually like a 1% improvement in an AI model doesn't really mean anything in terms of the actual usability of a system. And the AI model itself is probably 10% of the challenge, right? Data infrastructure, human capacity, kind of like even what it means, like what are the action spaces, what are the decisions that can actually be made, and how do you kind of take all of this data that we're generating and turn it into some sort of like decision support tool that handles all of the nuance and complexity and bias and uncertainty effectively. I think there's a lot beyond sort of what is possible to do with tech alone. And so sort of avoiding this pitfall of tech saviorism and thinking like, oh yeah, we could do that with AI, we could do that with a robot. And not recognizing sort of the full complexity of the system is a challenge. And I think it's something that we actually can only really address as we start to try to use the technology in the real world, but also really build these interdisciplinary spaces where, you know, people like Martin are at the table and are sort of voicing all of these very important and complex concerns that it's difficult if you're coming from computer science to really fully understand without these inroads and this like depth of experience in that area. I don't know, Martin, if you had anything else to add.
Yeah, I suppose the question is really quite interesting, and sometimes I would answer such a question by saying, you know, conservation, biodiversity conservation is a people problem. We kind of know really what we need to do. We need to protect more stuff in more places. It needs to be connected and all this kind of stuff. What we don't know is how to do it, and the sort of the structures that we need in place, the other opportunities that we need in place to allow to address the sort of root causes for why you might need to monitor rhinos so intensively. So there's I think the bigger challenges, a lot of the bigger challenges in conservation are around how the interactions between people and the environments within which they live, and the extent to which technology helps or hinders that is, I mean, it's an open question. We really kind of don't know. I think it can help, but it also some of the concerns that we've had raised to us are things like, you know, we sort of know often there are tried and tested ways of doing certain things in across many of the sustainable development goals, but also within biodiversity conservation. And will tech take away from that, or will it add to it? So that's that kind of supplement versus supplant thing, which Blair, you were sort of mentioning before. So how do you supplement what is already going on? How do you add value to it rather than replace the things that we know already work? And I think that's a really interesting area that doesn't really get enough attention, I don't think. Yeah, and you know, technology will continue to evolve and develop so rapidly, it'll be impossible to regulate for it, control it, and all this kind of stuff. It just won't happen in that way. But how can we think about how we might identify those sort of those unintended consequences, those challenges, those difficulties early in the stages where tech is being developed and identified and deployed?
And I think that, sorry, one more point. I think that specifically this like supplement versus supplant, like the places where we're actually seeing technology and AI sort of be used like in impactful ways at scale are places where we're sort of meeting the community where they are, you know, helping to process large volumes of camera trap data is happening, right? Like some of our models get used by thousands of organizations around the world. It saves people a ton of time and thus a ton of money. They're sort of just already doing these systems. It's well vetted, and this is just a mechanism to help make that sort of human cost a little bit less. But I think these ideas, when you think we can supplant, often like there's a bit of a lack of understanding of how complicated the real problem is. Anyway, I think we're over time. Sorry for.
I think we have one more minute, but I'm gonna leak like maybe a minute or two into because I think right after this is break. So what I just wanted to comment on that, it was a trick question because I think a lot of times the question is hardware or software, and I think it's really awesome that basically everyone talked about. There's a human element, right, that we often forget in these. So so kind of the last if anybody has some last comments, we'll do that. So really where the last kind of general comment that I had is, so the climate robotics community that is obviously here, and we're discussing this. Are there ways that the community can support you in general? You can discuss if there's ways that you're hiring, or are you looking for launching projects? No, Blair talked about this international collaboration. So maybe to end for the last maybe 6, if each person could answer this in like 30, 60 seconds briefly, what are some ways that it can support you? I will pass to Sara first.
I'm just gonna drop in the chat a YouTube channel that we've started that is essentially just a bunch of very quick 3-minute intros to faculty who run research labs at this interdisciplinary space. And so if any of you are looking to apply for PhD programs, for example, this fall, or master's programs, this is a great starting point. I think that there's a lot of really amazing kind of different approaches that people are taking here. And if any of you on the call would like to actually add a video to this, send it to me and I'll happily upload it, because we'd like to see this also expand. But we have, I think, 40 or so groups already represented around the world.
Yeah, I would say in the Wild Drone Project, we're always eager to hear from people in this space who are interested in partnering in various ways. So either who have technologies that could be tested, or have ideas for how we could improve the training of our PhD students, or offering secondments or internships or employment post-PhD, these types of things. We also are always eager to hear about ways that we might continue to fund this work. So through these projects, the funding that we get goes to the training of the PhD students and their research needs. And so we're always in particular interested in resources to fund capacity building with our partners, particularly in my case for those in East Africa. And yeah, we expect to hopefully be sharing some advertisements for PhD positions later in the year. So if you are in the market for a PhD position, or have promising people who you think should apply, they're open to anybody globally. So yeah, please apply when those come out. And you can sign up for our newsletter on Wild Drone website and get all the updates.
Martin?
So nothing specific from me. I think it's a really fascinating space, how tech, environment, society interact, and if there are opportunities to get involved, or yeah, if I can make contributions elsewhere, please do get in touch.
Angelo?
Well, the idea is that we have a lot of ideas of trying to solve some issues related to sampling, collecting data in extreme environments. So share any possible problem that can be solved maybe by some robotic tools that are always some things that are interesting for us. And obviously sharing people that are interested in this type of environments is something that is, as
Yeah.
said by Sara, Blair, always useful.
Yeah, so just to end, what I'll say is it's important in all of these collaborations. I do the Walt Whitman quote of "Be curious, not judgmental," when you're approaching these things. And I think this has been thank you everybody for being so open and honest with all of the stuff. Please see the links in chat, and I will pass it back to the Climate Robotics Summit team. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you all.
Let's give a warm applause to our speakers and the panelists. If you do have further questions for them, please do answer those, put those in the chat. But we also, in the handbook, there's a link where you can find out more about the speakers and that. We're going to take a short break before we come back to the pitches. So just give us about 10 minutes, and we're going to play some bird music, which my colleague will manage. And I'm really thankful for that. But just today, we've had like a phenomenal amount of just intelligent people sharing about their passion for climate robotics, and such pleasure to be here with you. So again, just a quick break. And we do know that some of you had some questions about, could we have the links in the chat? We're going to compile those into a document and share them back. You can always save yourself. But in that case, that we will also try and compile them for you because it is a community effort. So I'm going to go on face mute and hand it over to Axel for some music, and we'll be back at 5:30 or the bottom of the hour, depending on which time zone you're in. I am not sure what time that is in EST. If somebody can help me with that, I'm in Switzerland. So, and did I say whom I am? I'm Heather Leeson. I work on the Summit team as a volunteer. Thanks. Let's go and pop.